Hello, I'm Father Joe Gambala, pastor of St. Malachy Catholic Church in Sterling Heights. Welcome to our second episode in our series of Around the World, the search for faith and the presence of God in this beautiful world around us. Today we'll be traveling to Brazil. Before I was a priest, I was still a seminarian. I was finishing up my year as a seminarian. You did a year in a parish back then working, and I was working at Christ the King in Detroit. When my good friend Lanny was in the Toledo Diocese at the time, suggested, well, why don't you spend the summer at the missions? Well, at that time, the Archdiocese of Detroit had a mission in Recife, Brazil. So I asked and received permission to spend that summer with Father Bob Singlin down in Brazil. Well, Father Bob worked among the poorest of the poor. About 100,000 displaced farmers living in basically shacks in this rather rugged, steep area outside of Recife. These people were poor, and they were scraping for any job they could find to get by. It was a tough life, and most of these people used real fires to cook their food, so there always was a fog of smoke around the valley that we lived. Well, Bob Singlin managed 5 chapels in this area and was always very busy praying with people and doing their weddings and celebrating Mass and anointing people and doing funerals. One day, Father Singlin suggested, why don't you and I go and visit the retired bishop, Bishop Dom Helder Camara? Dom Helder Camara was a very important bishop in South American history, especially in the time when the military took over Brazil and there was a lot of persecution. Dom Helder had a radio. He'd broadcast the Mass, and people would tune into the Mass because they know it was the only uncensored news that they would get. And so the bishop would tell people the news of the outside world and what was really going on. He had retired and lived in a 4-room apartment attached to an old chapel. Well, that morning, Father Singlin and I took a taxi and went to that chapel. The retired archbishop met us, took us into his little kitchen, put out the cornflakes, put out the bowls. We poured our cornflakes. He gave us the milk to pour, opened up the sugar bowl, wiped off the ants, because ants are everywhere when you're on the equator. We put a sugar on our cornflakes, and we had breakfast. It was an amazing conversation. He told me that I should look at the stars. And I said, well, where I was living, you couldn't really see the stars because of the smoke. So he suggested that Father Singlin take me to the beach where the sea breezes blows the smoke away and look at all the stars of the southern hemisphere and think that for every star we see, there's 1,000 we don't. Of course, we know now, many years later, there's probably 1 billion we don't see for every one we see. He said that represents God as the great creator, the God that continues to make new worlds and spread his love, because love is a great creative force. And then he told me something which I've never forgotten. He said, in a year from now, he said, Joe, you're going to be a priest, and you're going to be celebrating the Eucharist at Mass, and you're going to be giving people the body and blood of Christ. Well, I got this as a gift. He gave me this as a gift. It's a simple wooden carving of a chalice. But you'll notice up here, all these people who represent people from his diocese in Brazil. But he reminded me, he said, Joe, whenever you confect the Eucharist, you're giving them Christ. But don't forget that after you give them Christ, you can't forget them when they walk out the door. You still have to be there for them afterwards. Yes, it's important to give them the Eucharist, but it's also to make important that they have a meal, that they have clothes, that they're able to have a doctor when they're sick. Caring about people is an extension of the Eucharist, because love that transcends the Eucharist into their hearts of their daily lives. So every time we have a food drive here at St. Malachy, or a clothing drive at St. Malachy, or a blood drive at St. Malachy, I don't just see this as a separate action called Christian service. I've learned to see that as an extension of the Eucharist that we give out at Mass. Thank you.